for the organization. I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties. It seems to be an everlasting problem with Zoom calls and Google Meets. But thank you very much, Jingrung, for your kind help. So in this segment, I will try to talk a bit about the European Media Freedom Act that was brought up by Professor Katsiria as well. And to me, it was very, very interesting what Katsiria told with regard to Article 17, I believe, which I will delve deep into in this presentation, is that it is very controversial. And in this present presentation that I will hold individually, as Professor Gergely Gosztonyi was not able to come, I will talk about how the digital media is being shaped by the European Union, especially via the European Media Freedom Act. So the first segment and the introduction with regard thereto is to understand and quite see what's happening in Europe with regard to digital, with regard to the digital landscape. So as presented before, of course, we can talk about the Digital Services Act, the DMA, the AI Act, and one a bit under-researched, or I would say underdeveloped segment is media freedom. And for that, the European Union tried to introduce the European Media Freedom Act. It is still a proposal. Thank you very much. I think we can go to the next slide. And the next one. Thank you. And so we have quite a bit of range when it comes to European regulation. If you all follow probably, or you all have heard about this, and this is very interesting how the EU tends to think of itself as a sort of breakthrough character in regulating digital media. And it is, of course, as reported by many scholars and many stakeholders in a sense, is because the EU has no part in, for example, very large online platforms. Only Zalando, the German fashion company, is among the biggest companies that provide service to Europe. The other ones are of course, American and Chinese. So it is interesting how the EU tends to approach the digitalization, not from the market standpoint, but from the legal standpoint. And in this segment, the European Media Freedom Act is something that is of extreme interest to us, especially in Hungary and other Central Eastern European countries, because it tends to provide a different definition to media and a new definition as to what media freedom is. And this is something that's very, very, very intriguing. So the main goals of the EMFA and the principles thereof are, of course, as presented before, a heightened transparency, guarantees to journalism. And when it comes to transparency, we talk about the ownership transparency, which the European Media Freedom Act tries to stipulate in many different ways. The current state of debate is, of course, still a proposal. We do not have the final draft. Of course, newer and newer versions are circulating all the time. But from the proposal that we can see and we can all access, Article 17 is of extreme interest. And I think we can go to the next one as well. So as you can see, Article 17 says that providers of very large online platforms. Now, for those who do not quite know what this kind of complex term means, not really complex, but kind of unusual term means, is these are platforms that have 45 million monthly active users. For example, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, whatnot. These are very large online platforms. They should provide a functionality allowing recipients of their services to declare that it is a media service provider, meaning that as per the definition of the EMFA, they think of themselves as media service providers. They generate their own content or moderate their own content or kind of so they think of I'm so sorry. So the content is being handled by these media companies, and of course they have some sort of editorial freedom in that sense. They think of themselves as editors of their own content. And Article 17, in this sense, says that very large online platforms should give a quick path or a fast track for these companies, for these media service providers, when when their content on the respective very large online platform is being taken down or when they are being moderated. So this is kind of a fast track in this sense. What is interesting and what is extremely intriguing is to assess Article 17 from a critical standpoint. And I think we can go to the next one as this is the core of the presentation. The first one is this: how can we harmonize all of these digital laws with regard to media, which is very, very different to platform regulation, despite current debates on how platforms are part of media? We can all think of the audiovisual media service directive, or for example, the national laws with regard to media, or media in the EU sense, which is not part of the harmonizational process, or never really was the part of the harmonizational process. So it is interesting how the EU tends to infiltrate this field, which is very, very, very distinct from other fields that for example, the Digital Services Act or the Digital Markets Act try to regulate. The second problem, and this is what we find very, very, very problematic and polemic, especially in Eastern Europe, are road providers. Now, road providers is a term that is proposed by Bose last year in an excellent study. And it says that as long as media service providers can act as media service providers and think of themselves and delegate themselves and title themselves as media service providers, they enjoy the fast track provided for by Article 17. Now think of troll websites, think of alt-right organizations who have a clear legal background, they do transparency reports, and they think of themselves and they describe themselves as media service providers. Now, they enjoy the same benefits as independent media, as other transparent media, as fact checkers or fact checking media. And this is very, very alarming, especially in those places when it is very, where there's a high number of rogue providers. And rogue providers also mean those providers who are affiliated indirectly with governments and with political parties. And this is something that we see in, for example, Poland and not really in Czechia, but in Hungary, especially so. Think tanks, namely independent service providers, who say that, okay, I'm not part of the government, I'm not affiliated with the government. However, I tend to repeat the same slogans and mottos and messages that the government does. Again, this is quite a big problem when it comes to regulating Article 17, and quite hard to enforce in that sense, especially for very large online platforms. And this includes my last point on this, who do not tend to differentiate between different countries, different contexts, and different media cultures. Can we expect, for example, Facebook or Twitter, for that matter, who is very, very proud that they are not part of the disinformation code anymore, to differentiate and distinguish the political messages in Hungary and then provide a more sophisticated route for understanding the moderation processes? I tend to be quite skeptical in that sense. And it is also important to mention that there are there are a multitude of small media firms, especially in Eastern Europe, who will have a very hard time proving themselves as media service providers. And we can also include, in this sense, individual journalists or activist journalists who do not fall within the scope of the European Media Freedom Act, and they will not enjoy the same rights as, for example, the aforementioned alt-right think tank, who has a clear background, a transparent ownership, and then we will enjoy the benefits for Article 17. So to requote my Professor Katsireya, it is very controversial. It is still a work in process, but from what we can see thus far, this tends to be, or this proposal proposes a very, very alarming situation where the EU delegates rights to very large online platforms to establish a new moderation system and to differentiate and to describe and title media service providers. I think that concludes my presentation, and thank you very much. And again, I'm so sorry about